Wherever we are seen, we are live unless you're watching it on demand, in which case we have taped this in the deep and murky past. Maybe you're watching this in some post-apocalyptic dystopia, which will also be known as later in 2021. If so, you'll know what the IT news was for August 5th, and it'll be lots of fun. This is the Gestalt IT Rundown, of course. We're going to get started in just one moment. Tom, an interesting week for news. I wouldn't say there's been like some blockbuster deals or anything like that. I think everybody's kind of taken that dog days of summer vacation. But some interesting stories. You ready to break it down? Get ready with it.
I am indeed.
All right, so we will get going then. Just make sure I'm recording. I am. All right, we'll get it going in 3, 2, 1. Hello all and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Stroffolino. I'm an editor at Gestalt IT. Joining me from across this great land of ours is the one, the only, the networking nerd himself, Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Rich. Very glad we are not living in a post-apocalyptic future yet, but I hear that's on tap for September.
We're living in a during apocalypse present right now, which is really great. Big thank you to Max Mortellaro, by the way, for stepping in and being the substitute Tom Hollingsworth last week. Had a lot of fun with him. But Tom, no one could ever fill your shoes. So we're going to get started with a little something we like to call news or not. This is where if there's just too much news or we're not sure if it hits the criteria for a full discussion, we need Tom's take if it is in fact news or not. You ready to get going with this, Tom?
I am ready. Let's do this.
All right, first up on news or not, Google launched a private beta of its Certificate Authority service. This will store private keys in GCP's Cloud Key Management Service and features a REST API to let customers easily acquire and manage certificates. The idea is to let organizations manage private certificates for secure connections and authentication at a scale not feasible if kept on an internal network, theoretically much more difficult. This will compete with AWS's Private Certificate Authority, and currently Azure doesn't actually offer a similar or direct competitor to this. Tom, news or not?
I don't know that this is news because I don't know who's going to use this unless you just happen to be using GCP for everything. So why do we have to have 95 certificate authorities? Pick 2, stick with them, be evil and kick out the ones who are doing stupid stuff like Komodo. But I mean, I don't know ultimately what this is going to accomplish other than another service that Google's just going to kill off in 6 more weeks.
Yeah, I think that would ultimately be the biggest concern is their reputation for kind of doing that. Admittedly, it's in private beta now, which means it'll be in there for 6 years before they go ahead and kill it. So that'll work out quite nicely. Yeah. Speaking of which, I just migrated all my music off of Google Play Music, RIP Google Play Music. Next up here, Catalin Sampanu over at ZDNet doing the Lord's work reports that hackers published a list of plaintext usernames, passwords, SSH server keys, and IP addresses for over 900 Pulse-secure VPN enterprise servers. The list appears to have been compiled in late June 2020, and according to Bank Security, the list has been seems to have been created by an attacker scanning the IPv4 internet address space as a whole for Pulse servers running firmware with a documented vulnerability, which was then accessed to gain info. The vulnerability was discovered last August, and 677 of the 900 in the dump still have not been patched. Tom, news or not?
That's news. Patch your stuff. Seriously. I don't know why we have to keep saying this in the year of the pandemic and craziness, but come on, guys. You knew about it for almost a year. They scanned, they found it, they dumped your info. Oh, we don't know how this could have happened. I know. I know how this happens. There's a reason why Shodan is a thing.
And the particularly the numbers doesn't seem that in the grand scheme of hacks and stuff like that and these kind of disclosures 900 doesn't seem like that big of a, but these are VPN enterprise servers that are kind of sitting on the edge and kind of managing access to large enterprise networks, so particularly damaging to have that kind of out in the open. Next up here, Mozilla released Firefox 79 last week, which included a new feature called Enhanced Tracking Protection, designed to block against redirect tracking. This tracking technique has become more commonly used as browsers began blocking third-party cookies, effectively redirecting a user who interacts with an ad to their own domain to drop a cookie, then bringing them back to the original source, as opposed to dropping it from you become the first party at that point, kind of a clever workaround, dare I say. The feature works by clearing all first-party cookies every 24 hours for all known advertisers as a way to prevent the redirect technique. Tom, Firefox getting creative with ad tracking blocking, news or not?
I think it's news because it's basically Firefox sticking a standard in the ground and being like, guess what? We're not going to let you mess around with things anymore. So we used to build web browsers to properly render pages and implement, marquee tags and blink tags. And now we're basically building browsers to screw over ad providers. So, yay.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I wonder if this is a bit of an arms race for them in terms of, okay, we disabled this one thing, advertisers are going to, to try and find different ways to track. I do wonder if they're going to have to keep just kind of chasing this thing. I'm glad that they're doing it and giving people that choice, as opposed to just kind of advertisers being sneaky with how they're doing it. Next up here, Google started rolling out Nearby Share, their answer to AirDrop on Android. This feature is rolling out across Pixel and Samsung Galaxy devices first, and eventually across newer Android. I think it's version 6.0 or later, and Samsung Galaxy devices. Across Android and Chromebooks, excuse me. This will let users select files to share with an option to do so anonymously, and Nearby Share will then choose Bluetooth, Bluetooth Low Energy, WebRTC, or peer-to-peer Wi-Fi to share the file, just depending on different factors. Latency, I'm sure distance also comes into it as well. AirDrop is one of those underappreciated features that keeps people hooked into iOS. Is Nearby Share's multi-protocol support news or not?
Man, I don't know. Okay, great. That's the thing. You're trying to replicate AirDrop. That's basically what you're trying to do. I don't know very many people that use AirDrop.
I would say that is if you're in the Mac or the Apple ecosystem, right, where you're on a MacBook, you're using an iPad, you're using that. I mean, that is, if you need to get something off your phone and to work on it on another device, that is the only other way to do that. If you're using like a Windows machine, is like you upload it to Slack, Google Drive. Like it removes that kind of that friction. Concern would be, Apple just kind of does it one way. They do a weird combination. They use, I think, what is it, Bluetooth to make the connection and Wi-Fi for the actual transfer, vice versa. Yeah. They do use some sort of multi-protocol. It's interesting because Google has to connect, or is trying to connect to a wider range of devices. They don't know the exact specification on all these. I feel like this multi-protocol stuff is less about, oh, we need to find the best thing for your latency and your environmental factors, and more like, well, what does this device actually support? And we're just going to try and throw everything that we can at it to make sure it kind of works and doesn't fail.
Yeah, see, I firmly believe that Apple has the up here because it's a closed ecosystem. It's iOS connecting to macOS. That's easy to do. This is going to fall apart real fast because this isn't going to work long term once things start spiraling out of control.
Yeah, and all someone needs to have is one Huawei device, and I'm sure that'll muck up everything then for the end of time.
Exactly.
Someone with Windows Mobile is very sad. And finally, the password manager LastPass launched an updated security dashboard and now gives an overview of all of your accounts, highlighting any passwords that could pose a security risk. The dashboard now also gives you a compromised a score based on that as well, just to kind of contextualize that. Although they're not exactly transparent as to like how you get like a 6 versus a 7 or something like that. At least it kind of shows you the relative risk involved with that. But what's interesting is the dashboard is looking for compromised passwords proactively that appear on the dark web, partnering with Zoic's compromised credential database, similar to something like Have I Been Pwned, which 1Password uses, I believe, for kind of their search. But proactively looking on the dark web for compromised passwords. News or not here, Tom?
This is good ultimately because it just prevents you from doing something stupid. Although, let's be fair, if you're using a password manager and you're not using the function to automatically generate a password and just paste it in, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice because let's be fair, the best password is one you don't even know. So I like where they're going with this. I think it's going to help password hygiene in the future. It's table stakes for password managers at this point, I think. Yeah,
and I do wonder, we have password managers, speaking of Google and Apple, they kind of have theirs baked into Chrome and iOS respectively. I do wonder how long it'll be till we see a partnership with one of them, with one of these services. I mean, I'm willing to bet Google is doing something like that, although I don't think they're sending out notifications or anything like that. So I would be interested to see if any of those kind of first-party ones follow that approach as well.
Yeah.
Next up here, and have I been posting, I guess, is getting bought. So maybe, maybe there's acquisitions to be made in the future. First up here for our discussion, though, interesting story coming out of Bloomberg. We've talked about we talked about previously that SoftBank was looking to sell ARM, that they had divested some things from ARM, kind of take them back into SoftBank proper, to maybe try and lean it up and make it a better acquisition target. And now we have reported from Bloomberg that Nvidia is the only party in kind of concrete talks to actually buy ARM in a deal that's been reported to be worth around $32 billion, or about one TikTok. SoftBank bought ARM in 2016 for $31 billion. So if that price holds up, not exactly getting a huge return 4 years later, which is interesting in and of itself. The sources say Nvidia is the, like I said, the only company kind of in these concrete negotiations. In fact, Apple kind of came out and said, hey, we're not going to be pursuing this because it would never pass regulatory muster, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Nvidia mostly makes GPUs, is kind of the historically the bulk of their business. In terms of ARM processors, their Tegra mobile chips are used in things like the Nvidia Shield, the Nintendo Switch. Those are based on ARM designs, but they don't quite have the market share of something like a Qualcomm or something like that, that I think it immediately raises regulatory red flags here. Tom, I'm curious, though, is that ARM mobile business would be the main motivator for Nvidia, or what do you see as driving this potential acquisition by Nvidia? A lot of money to put up, admittedly, for a very valuable piece of IP.
No, you're right. Here's the thing. I think, first of all, I think SoftBank's got to sell. They took a massive black eye from the whole WeWork thing, and they need cash. So that's why the sale price doesn't look rosy. But also, who else is going to buy this? Intel doesn't want it. Everybody else is going to be mired in a mess. And Nvidia's kind of been on a chipset tear for a while. I mean, they bought Mellanox. I think what you're going to see, mobile is good. Like, I think that they're going to continue to develop the mobile ARM stuff. But I think what you're actually going to see is they're going to start branching this across the enterprise. I think you're probably going to see, a big push for ARM infrastructure devices. I mean, you've got, okay, so now Nvidia owns Mellanox. They can make chips. They own Cumulus. They can run the operating system. Maybe do an ARM offload or something like that. I think that has a lot of potential. But I mean, when you look at everything else that's going on, when you look at the fact that Intel missed on their 7 nanometer, that gives whoever has ARM a really big head start to kind of start displacing Intel in a lot of things. And mobile obviously is huge, but I don't think this is the end of the thing. Mobile's not worth $32 billion, but mobile being a cherry on top, I could see that.
It certainly is a nice hedge, and again, we're probably going to see that business, continue to grow, right, as or at least maintain a steady source of revenue for ARM licenses and that kind of stuff. Probably expand as we're seeing Apple and other companies try and make more desktop applications for ARM, a thing on the consumer side at least. But yeah, to me, this is all about cloud, and it is really interesting. You mentioned Cumulus, and if you look at their recent acquisitions, Nvidia is not a company that makes a ton of acquisitions, which is what made that Mellanox acquisition kind of really stand out. Again, within the past year, they've already spent $7 billion to buy a pretty big piece of equipment, and so with Mellanox, they're getting kind of that interconnect piece, which could, I think, to me, you said enterprise. To me, I see this as specifically a cloud play, right? You have, where's the next big growth area for ARM? You have Amazon, Microsoft, Google, basically all working on some version of ARM-based instances for the cloud. Turns out you need to buy a lot of chips, which require a lot of licenses to get that. And if that market takes off, now, admittedly, not a sure thing. But Amazon seems to be wanting to invest a lot of money into pursuing that, and if that takes off, they now have they have an operating system. You have SwiftStack, which is kind of another cloud backend piece. You have Mellanox to kind of connect it all, and now you have the chips that are going to be running on there. To me, that's the play here for Nvidia as they continue to transition firmly into being a data company. And also to hedge off, more specialized chips. ARM still is a fairly general purpose chip, but can be customized, kind of by design, to have specific machine learning components or specific, be specific for applications. It doesn't just have to be a general purpose chip. So yeah, to me, this screams NVIDIA's after some of that sweet cloud money for sure. All right, next up here. interesting kind of situation going on here. So, Tom, you're familiar with the cloud backup provider BackBlaze,
I
correct?
am familiar. Yeah.
They put out amazing hard drive statistics from all of their hard drives that they use for backups, and you can see which drives are reliable and stuff like that. Always love looking at that every year. But their B2 cloud storage service has been around for a while, and I think it's carved out a pretty healthy niche with the SMB market, but it really hasn't been part of a larger enterprise buying. If you're a large enterprise, you're not exactly looking at that as your first choice or something like that. The company's made those some interesting moves to kind of change that narrative. And Tom, I'm curious about your thoughts about this. Backblaze recently launched S3 compliant APIs, so their storage can work with applications that enterprises might want to use. Now the company is offering to pay AWS S3 egress migrate than 50 terabytes and keep using their B2 storage for at least 12 months. Backblaze is seeing increased adoption with a reported 25% month-on-month storage growth. So, I mean, not exactly blockbuster numbers, but that is month-on-month. It's not even quarter to quarter. It seems like a decent clip of growth. But Ken, this seems like a tactic that a cell phone provider uses to get you to switch. Is that going to be effective? Where we're looking at, SMEs, or are we looking at larger enterprise? Cost is the cost of things is a weird thing in the enterprise, right?
Yeah, like go download any licensing document, and what things cost is like a Rain Man sketch. It's like, well, how much does a used car cost? I don't know, $1,000. How much does a Snickers bar cost? I don't know, $1,000. Here's the thing. First of all, bravo to Backblaze for recognizing that the hard part of cloud is not doing it. The hard part of cloud is paying for it. And man, AWS is a lot like an a la carte cafeteria. Like, hey, that salad costs this much, and those packets of sugar cost this much, and that bread roll costs this much. So solving some pain points. But here's the thing, folks, if you're watching this, pay attention. If they're offering to pay for something that you would have to pay for, they are making that money somewhere else. So it's like, kind of like you said with cell phone providers. Remember when you used to be able to get an iPhone for $199? If you sign up for a 2-year contract, do the math. You're going to pay more than that phone is worth over the course of those 2 years. Why? Well, it turns out subsidizing things means that people stop looking at the cost. So if it's, let's just say we'll use round numbers here. It costs you $1,000 a year to export data out of AWS, which is ridiculously low. And Backblaze is like, oh, well, we'll do it, but we'll only charge you, like $50 a month or something like that. And when you do all the math, maybe it works out, and my math didn't work out, but let's just say that $1,000, when it's broken down on a monthly cost, if they can absorb that and you're not paying 2 bills, but you're paying one slightly larger bill, you're not going to ask questions, and Backblaze could be making a small fortune after they send all of the money off to Amazon. Or, and I hate to say it, but maybe they cut a deal with Amazon where they're going to pay less for egress fees, because now it looks like Backblaze is paying all, we're going to export all the data from Backblaze, and now all of a sudden we're getting a price discount because we're transferring, multiple terabytes. I don't know if AWS would be willing to do that, but
I do wonder if also then, a year or two later down the road, or they're already probably, if they're planning this, they're already probably alpha or testing at this point, that there would then be additional services, obviously, on top of that. Oh, since you're here, we might as well sell you some load balancing, or like anything, or some compute, we can offer that. I do think, again, like, cost is such a weird component in enterprise decision making. Like, when I go to buy something, usually the cost is like the first or second thing that I'm looking at. Like, is it there? How much does it cost? And for enterprise, that might, especially when you get to a certain scale, it is definitely not necessarily the first thing. I mean, things are going to be expensive no matter what when you're operating at scale. So ease of use, they're making some benefits with, obviously, the S3 compliance is like the most table stakes thing that they could have done, and they've done that. Congratulations, happy to see that. I think this is really more of kind of going from that SMB into that, small to medium enterprise space. I know some people think that's a distinction without a difference, but I do think that there is a way to, go into a larger scale of business. I don't think they're ever going to be, I mean, I guess, what is their competitor, Wasabi, at this, where they're operating at in terms of, performant online storage and that kind of stuff. It's an interesting move, and certainly hitting at, one of the most familiar pain points that a lot of organizations have. It almost reminds me of we do. I'm sure you have something similar, Tom, where you're at. One of our local grocery stores does like a fuel perks thing, where if you spend like
Hmm.
$20, you get 10 cents off gas or whatever like that. And it's like if you do the math, the $5 that you saved filling up the one time because you spent $100 at the grocery store doesn't make any sense, but it kind of does make you want to go. Like it feels good when you go to buy the gas and it's a little cheaper. So I
Yeah.
do wonder if that might be a little bit of the same phenomenon. We'll see how successful they are with that, and also how long they keep that going, because I am curious about if that's a loss leader or something a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And then finally here, we got major earnings. Now there were the big hearings on about tech antitrust hearings that happened over a week ago now. Again, that's kind of, we could do a whole show about that. It also isn't directly related to enterprise. They didn't really talk about like cloud and that kind of stuff. Also, Microsoft wasn't there. Very weird. But it caused everyone to delay their earnings till after that, because I didn't think they all wanted to show that they made bags and bags of cash as they were talking to senators about why they're not too big. But we do now have earnings for AWS, Microsoft, and Google, or Alphabet. And we have some clarity over where their cloud figures are. I always think it's interesting to look at this. All three major cloud providers saw revenue increases on the year, but interestingly, across the board, Azure, AWS, GCP, we're seeing growth slowing. Now, this has been a trend for over 2 years now with Amazon, and that's certainly continued. This is their 9th consecutive decrease in growth, with now AWS revenue growing 29%. Nothing to sneeze at, certainly, but it's the first time it's been under 30%, and actually it accounted for 1% less of the company's overall revenue than it did on the year. So I think that's interesting that it's becoming less. I mean, that to me is very significant. I know it's only 1%, 13%. Still kind of a big deal. Now, they did generate over $10 billion in revenue. They account for like over 50% of Amazon's profit. Amazon's fine. I'm not trying to say that. But we're now seeing this with Azure decreasing from 59% growth to 47% growth, and GCP slowing from 52 to 43% quarter over quarter. So it's not just, previously the narrative has been Amazon's the biggest. Of course, they're going to slow down. They have the biggest lead. This just shows that the cloud market is maturing. Everybody else has so much room to catch up. They can keep growing at these crazy numbers. Tom, everyone is like kind of the narrative, I think, with everybody working from home with COVID is that we're all turning to the cloud. We're all turning to SaaS apps. In that environment where seemingly everyone is using the cloud for work and everything else more often, why are we still, I guess, are you surprised to see those revenue numbers, the growth on those slowing down across the board, basically?
I'm not surprised to see the growth slowing down, because who else is going to go to cloud at this point? It's the same argument that we had all those years ago when everybody wanted to go out and start their own cell phone store. Okay, great. What are you going to do when everybody has a cell phone? Well, that's why now we have yearly cell phone releases as opposed to waiting every couple of years. But ultimately, yes, we are driving more cloud adoption because people are working from home, because people are doing a lot more with, getting applications are going cloud first. We're not trying to do things on premises. In fact, look at the way that data center, if you think being off 1% on your cloud growth is bad, look at what it's getting cost for like on-premises data center stuff. The growth numbers on that are going down significantly because people are moving to cloud. But as they move more things to cloud, they need to move less things. Sure, they're still going to consume cloud servers, cloud things like that. But now we're starting to get into that thing. A good example of this is Corey Quinn with the Duck-Built Group. His job is to go out and reduce your AWS bill by tweaking things, right? Well, if you're spending less money in the cloud, that looks like growth reduction, when in fact what you're doing is you're just using the cloud you have more efficiently. So I think what'll happen is that this is the start of the contraction of the rubber band a little bit. So we were doing this, and now we've done this. Are we going to do this? Or are we going to go back to here? We don't know. A lot of it's going to depend on how people decide to build things. And I don't see cloud slowing down, but I also don't see like massive amounts of people rushing to the cloud like we have in the past.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. It's a really good point about also the business pressures of operating in a pandemic. I'm sure are causing everyone, even as cloud use, the usage of the cloud, your users that are using Zoom calls and stuff like that is increasing. For exactly trying to use things more efficiently is not just a hey, this is in our roadmap for a year from now. It's like, hey, we need to save some money so we can keep the lights on. Let's figure out how we can reduce that AWS bill. I'm sure is an imperative for a lot more businesses. The other side of it is that there are also, we mentioned, SoftBank and some of their investments that haven't worked out. One of them is their investment with Uber, and basically any ride hailing or anything like that has also seen a massive decrease in the amount of cloud usage that they're using. Those are giant customers as well. I'm sure, that's just the one most top of mind. I'm sure there are a lot of businesses when you're talking about event, any kind of event industry, travel industry, that kind of stuff. All of those I'm sure are all built on AWS or the cloud, or I'm sure a lot of them are. Maybe not the airlines. They're all based on weird IBM databases from the 60s. But it's true. But a lot of those obviously have a lot of decreased spend as well, as those industries are pretty tight up at the moment. So I do think that also plays into it as well, and just also that the value of I guess maybe this shows that the value of expanding your use of the cloud is worth less to these companies in terms of revenue than bringing in new customers, and that ultimately, kind of to your point, Tom, that we've reached a little bit of a saturation point where it's like everyone has a little bit of cloud. Yes, they may have expanded it significantly or faster than they had planned to, but very few people are like, oh yeah, we should think about the cloud now, like for the first time. I don't think there's a lot of brand new customers.
And one thing I will say about that specific point, and I'm going to reference something that's happened a few years ago. If your numbers, if your stock price, if your metrics are driven by growth, and growth slows, because all growth slows. Trees can only be 460 feet high because of gravity. You can't fight that. If you use growth as your metric and you have to keep driving growth, that's when you get into the situation that Wells Fargo found itself in, where you have to keep driving growth by doing really shady crap. So this maybe is a word of caution for the wonks on Wall Street. Stop using these metrics to drive stock prices. Rather than inventing something and saying, oh, well, growth is unlimited. Don't do that. It's like saying, well, this car is the best because it goes the fastest in the shortest amount of time. Yeah, until you have to haul a couch. Then a Lamborghini becomes a really horrible car. Stop using the wrong metrics to measure things. And I promise you, stock price may need to be adjusted over time, but you'll find out that the company will be a whole lot healthier.
Yeah, it won't be trying to cannibalize itself to keep itself going long term. Again, just to emphasize, like AWS, they did. It is interesting they did misanalyze expectations. Again, that all goes back to weird financial chicanery that I don't even pretend to understand. But they do drive just still a tremendous amount of profit for AWS. I don't think that even if growth eventually slows more significantly than we've seen over the past 2 years, I don't think that changes for them. That's just a very high profit business overall. I'm assuming it's the same way for Azure and GCP as well. And so, yeah, to your point, revenue growth is great to see, again, to get your stock back at some point and make a ton of money when you're some weird trader. Functionally, though, for these businesses, I think they're only becoming more essential and more important to businesses, and ultimately that is, I think, in the long term, much more important than what percentage their revenue grew in one quarter in an unprecedented time in history. So, but still, when these numbers come out, I do think it's interesting to kind of parse the tea leaves, because we don't get a lot of visibility into other aspects of their business, and they're kind of important to the modern enterprise. So, always worth talking about. All right, Tom, well, that just about brings us to the end of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Thank you so much for being here. Where can people find more of your great stuff if they're so inclined?
You can check me out at gestaltit.com. It's the best place to find some of the most recent writing that I've been doing. In fact, I just published an article about some of the latest announcements from Arcus. It's Black Hat Week, so I've got a lot of Black Hat briefings coming up, and we will definitely be trying some of those out and updating you more on what's going on there.
All right, you can find my writing at gestaltit.com as well. You can also find my video essay series Checksum at youtube.com/gestaltitvideo. New episodes come out every Monday, so keep an eye open for that. Maybe something to do with Nvidia and Arm this week, kind of a follow-up on our look at why they bought Mellanox, kind of following on our discussion here, Tom. Always good stuff, so looking forward to that together. Until next week, we'll be back next Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, running down the IT news of the week. Until then, for myself, for Tom Hollingsworth, for all of us here at the Gestalt IT family, here's wishing you and yours to have a super sparkly day.